In January 1967, we were given a recording session at Sound Techniques on Old Church Street, just off Kings Road. Joe was the producer and studio owner. John Wood was the sound engineer. All of the recordings, including Arnold Lane, a song we've been playing live for some time now, and a version of Interstellar Overdrive, were made on a 4-track mono recorder. We recorded bass and drums on one track, guitar and quivering Farfisa Duo keyboards on 2 others. All the effects, like the drum replays on Arnold Lane, were added after the 3 tracks were reset to track 4, and the vocals and all the guitar solos were overdubbed. The final mix was then recorded in mono. You always sound great in a professional recording studio. Even at the studio in West Hampstead, when we first heard ourselves on playback, with echo for drums and vocals, in a decent mix, we were delighted. Sound Techniques was the next step. The studio boasted state-of-the-art Tannoy Red studio monitors, the finest speakers of the period. Clad in polished walnut wood, they stood almost 5 feet tall and, compared to anything we're used to, the bass sounded incredible on them. Listening now to Arnold Lane and other songs of the same phase of our development, I do not blush with shame. I'm not at all embarrassed by our early recordings. It all sounds quite professional, although it was recorded very quickly. The number of tracks was limited, and you had to decide in advance which instrument would go to which track, and then mix it all up. However, the music as a whole does not appear to have been affected. Candy and a Current Bun was originally titled Let's Roll Another One and included the following lyrics: I'm high, don't try to spoil my fun. Since we were taking a big risk in the still very conservative record industry with lyrics like that, we had to whip up another one in haste. For some reason, we also felt that for the song Arnold Lane we needed an accompanying video. While TV programs like Most Popular rarely used clips, except perhaps some Americans who otherwise wouldn't have made it to England, we already saw ourselves as a multimedia group. Derek Nice, a friend of June Child and also the only filmmaker we knew, was assigned to direct the film, and we headed to the Sussex coast to get started. This black and white film, inspired by A Hard Day's Night, looks surprisingly modern and relatively funny. There are 4 of us on the beach with the 5th member of the group, who turns out to be a shop dummy. Everything was going great. We had an offer from Polydor, a producer, several records, even a promotional video. However, as is often the case in the music business, someone had to be thrown overboard to keep the boat going. In this case, Joe Boyd was thrown overboard. The agility with which Peter and I threw Joe overboard was just embarrassing. However, in those days it was impossible to sign a deal with the company and bring your favorite producer there. So now we've become artists who record at EMI, and unlike most bands, we went there with a record in hand. Shortly after signing the contract, we went to a show at Queen's Hall in Leeds, once the city's tram depot and now home to 5,000 wild northern fans who came to watch the 10 o'clock riot led by Cream and the Small Faces, and described in the Daily Express as the night Carnaby Street moved north. After this particular concert, I realized that I can no longer combine studying at the institute and life in a group. I still allegedly studied architecture, but in fact, of course, all the time, performed at rehearsals, on stage, or on the road. Even though John Corp did all the work for me at the institute, I was hopelessly behind. My college mentor that year, Joe Mayo, to whom I am eternally grateful, said it would be a good idea for me to take a year's sabbatical. Joe assured me that next year, if I wanted to, he would take me back. Nothing more was said, but I think he understood that I was a rather mediocre architect. He probably assumed that the time spent searching for myself would either give me a better career, or at least make me a better designer. We also had to fulfill another commitment to Emmy by taking a 30-minute so-called artist test, an audition. This test was subjected to each of their new group, but in our case, the test was done for pro forma, since we had already signed a contract. Then we were supposed to provide the company with a single, and, of course, we immediately provided the finished record. So on March 11th came out the single Arnold Lane, Candy and a Current Bun on the Back, recorded at Sound Techniques and produced by Joe Boyd before we signed with Emmy. Trying to re-record it didn't improve the original. Just 6 months after the summer holidays and the beginning of our work with Peter Jenner and Andrew King, we became professional recording artists. A couple of months after signing the contract, we were hosted at a full-blown record company party, hosted by veterans of the record company, including Beecher Stevens, who actually signed a contract with us. They set up a stage at Manchester Square headquarters, brought our light show there, and we simulated a performance of Arnold Lane. After a lavish celebration of the signing of the contract with Emmy, it's time to get down to earth and get down to serious work. Unlike many other bands, we didn't pay off our musical debts. In fact, we didn't really make the first installment. We did not have exhausting tours, we did not play for a whole year in clubs on the Reeperbahn. Throughout the fall of 1966, we performed at a few of our favorite venues and surrounded by a very dedicated audience. We had yet to face the unknown civilizations that lurked outside the psychedelic village. Shortly after the Emmy deal, we bought a Ford Transit, a serious status symbol, a sort of Rolls-Royce for transporting rock bands. Before the release of the single See Emily Play, we never appeared on the TV screen and were completely unknown to everyone who was in the audience. The only top 20 hit we had, Arnold Lane, was quite different from the rest of our repertoire, and this single was played very little on the radio and not played on TV. In 1967, we could not even rely on the sympathy of the student audience. At that time, the university environment did not exist as such, partly because there were very few provincial universities, and partly because the students did not seem to be very interested in organizing concerts. Accordingly, I had to work in the networks of clubs and dance halls. If you look at the list of our concerts in 1967, you can see how their number has grown. In the second half of 1966, 20, the next year, more than 200. And that's without taking into account our first US tour, a trip to Europe for TV commercials and the time spent recording 3 singles and 1 album. Some concerts, however, are quite memorable. Quite typical was our 1967 Scottish tour. It consisted of only 5 concerts, and the first 2 we gave were at Elgin and Nairn in the north of Scotland, where our impudent English intrusion was vigorously rebuffed. The local newspaper featured us on the same page as the local fruitcake competition, and the typical response from the public about our work was, "I'll sing better in the bath than these English dudes, count." Closer to home, the reception was a little warmer. At Dunstable's California Ballroom, the audience could do a great show of disapproval by pouring booze from the balcony above the stage onto the heads of the band members. At a concert at the Feathers in Ealing, Roger received a direct hit in the forehead with an old copper penny, a fairly heavy projectile. I remember this well, because for the rest of the speech, Roger was looking for the guy who threw the coin. There was also an unforgettable performance on the Isle of Man during a Scottish 2-week celebration, 14 days in July, dedicated to all the natives of Glasgow who flocked there for serious fun. The stage at the local concert venue was high above the dance floor, so that even the tallest Celt would not pull his paws and drag the musicians down into the general crowd. The promoter ruefully noted that, from experience, the best thing to do was to keep playing, no matter what was happening in the hall, turn on the lights brighter, and forget about our light show. We'd better listen. However, his advice turned out to be sheer nonsense against the backdrop of ominous signs that were not slow to appear, as soon as I sat down at the drums. A puddle of blood caught my eye in the very spot where just a few minutes ago the drummer of the previous band had sat. Obviously, he disappointed someone and got hit by direct fire. When we began to play and the light dimmed, the audience even fell silent in surprise. At first we thought it was the music and our light show that caught their attention, but an ominous rumble soon showed how wrong we were. In fact, the darkness gave the Celts the opportunity to fall on each other in insane fury. Strange, but such experiments did not kill our enthusiasm. From the pure horror of some concerts, where we were poured with insults, the spirit of the group only strengthened, like that of a past combat. Platoon christening. On the way, we observed the strictest economy. All alcohol was bought in advance in some roadside cafe, where they sold takeaway, so as not to depend on inflated prices in bars. We ignored hotels in favor of long trips home, which prevented all the wild time that the rest of the band seemed to enjoy. Brian Morrison's agency was so talented at scheduling concerts that we had to constantly zigzag across the country, and it seemed as if we did not get out of the van at all. Money was usually tight, there was more work, but we were still forever in debt because we were constantly updating the equipment. In theory we paid ourselves a weekly salary of £30, but in reality we only managed to get £7.10. In between endless travels, we occasionally put on home shows at the UFO Club, though after January 1967 only about once a month. On April 29, the 14-hour Technicolor Dream 9-night party took place at Alexandra Palace, where, in addition to us, Alex Harvey, Soft Machine and Arthur Brown performed, among others. By the time it was Pink Floyd's turn to perform in this rather dilapidated venue, it was already dawn, the sun was shining through the old stained glass windows, and people were clambering up the scaffolding around the organ. Great concert, only God knows how it all really sounded. In the early evening of the same day we played a gig in Holland, finished, rolled up, the overexcited Dutch rushed us at full speed into the night to the last plane to England, and after landing we frantically rushed to North London to play the Technicolor Dream. Games for May, 2 weeks later, was one of the most important gigs we've ever played, as there were elements that we've used consistently for the next 30 years. Although we had very little time to prepare and rehearse the 2-hour program, we still managed to organize the evening as a Pink Floyd multimedia event. Unlike our regular concerts, there was no one on the opening act, you could control the atmosphere and create the mood yourself. The auditorium at Queen Elizabeth Hall was seated, so the audience, quite uncharacteristic of a rock concert, had to sit and listen to the music, not dance. To a large extent, the concert was improvisational. We played the usual repertoire. We had some extra lighting and a bubble machine, as well as home overhead projectors that had to be placed in the middle of the stalls so that the light somehow finished off. This required some technical and legal improvisation, since at that time sound and light mixing was always controlled from the edge of the stage. This was a few years before it became common practice to arrange sound and light installations in the auditorium. The International Times reported that the event was a truly glorious idea, a genuine 20th century chamber music concert. The azimuth coordinator, which we first used at the games for May Concert, was run by Rick. There were 2 channels, each with its own knob, one for the farfisa organ, the other for the sound effects. If the knob was in a vertical position, the sound was concentrated in the center. Moving the knob diagonally sent the sound to a loudspeaker in the corresponding corner of the concert hall. Under Rick's direction, the organ sounds swirled or paced using a Revox tape recorder from wall to wall. It is true that we were banned from further performances at Queen Elizabeth Hall, not at all because our overexcited fans stripped the upholstery from the seats, but because one of the members of our tour crew, dressed in the uniform of an admiral, scattered flower petals along the aisles. The owners of the hall considered this a potential threat to the safety of that part of the audience that was unsteady on its feet. The song Arnold Lane was also banned, both by the pirate radio stations Radio London and Radio Carolina, and the BBC, which complicated our promotion, since there were only 1 or 2 active radio stations then and counted. It all seems absurd now and delightfully old-fashioned, given the ultra-revealing nature of 21st century texts, but at the time, censorship was still rampant. In any case, it was very difficult to break into the radio, since the available airtime was very scarce. When we ran into radio hurdles, the only way out for us, as for any other band that hoped to break into the top 20 of the charts, was to advertise and promote their record in every possible way. The single Arnold Lane, released in March 1967, reached number 20 in the UK charts. The next single was See Emily Play, and we tried to record it in the Abbey Road studio. There, however, we couldn't reproduce the sound of Arnold Lane and dragged ourselves back to Sound Techniques to recreate the magic formula, which gave Joe Boyd a certain malevolent pleasure. By the time Emily came out, the banning of the Arnold Lane single brought us additional benefits. Now all the radio stations unanimously began to play our new single, and 2 weeks later we moved to the 17th position of the hit parade. A place in the top 20 ensured our appearance in the most popular. And this, in turn, put us on the next, very important step of the ladder up and promised real advertising. Appearing on national television was supposed to increase both our visibility and our ability to make a living from concerts. The phrase "heroes of the TV screen" guaranteed at least an extra £100 for the evening. But the show itself has rather broken us off. A performance under the plywood looks idiotic and at the best of times, and then it was definitely not the best time. It is especially difficult for a drummer to imitate playing. In order not to make noise, you must either not touch the drums at all, or beat from the side. Plus, in the studio, with no physical work and no real audience response, all the adrenaline is wasted. The following week, our single jumped to number 5 on the charts, so we went to the BBC again and did the show again. Piper was released in August 1967. Peter Jenner was deeply impressed by Norman Smith's contributions. Norman was just great. He managed to make a fantastic, very commercial record, squeezing down to 3 minutes what Pink Floyd had to offer, without destroying either their quirky musicianship or the eccentricity of Sid's writing. Meanwhile in England we were still planning the band's future. Roger told the Melody Maker, "Right now, we're frustrated that we have to play in a lot of venues that don't suit us in order to survive. We love our music. This is the only driving force behind us. But we can't go on riding in clubs and ballrooms. We want a new environment and are already thinking about using a big top. We planned for the future, but didn't know how to approach it.